Hello, friends, fans, and dairy products of all ages. This is Choose of Ages here with the third episode of The Main Reason, featuring Nautilus. A quick addendum to my video on Caitlyn. In a video after that, I said that I was going to venture away from Caitlyn because she just wasn't cutting it. I'd like to accent the statement I also made in that video is that I'm not good enough to carry games with Caitlyn. While she's a good entry-level ADC and you'll learn marksman reasonably easily with her, and she's a safe pick, she falls off mid, and while she comes back late game, she doesn't come back as hard as a lot of marksmen do scaling into late game. She scales pretty much the worst of all ADCs, not including Urgot, which brings other things to the table, and she even scales worse than Twitch, but Twitch balances out by having a shit every other thing. Really weak laning phase. So she really doesn't have a super good place in the utility and mid to late game focused meta that's going on these days. She's still a decent safe pick to at low elos when you're learning the game to win. And in fact, even though I'm branching away from her because she's not cutting it, 80% of the time I win my lane. It's just once that phase ends, or if everybody else is doing poorly, I can't do anything. Unless the team is solid and doing solidly, I can't really function in the mid to late game. If my team is solid enough to at least have solid mechanics and solid team fighting, I can do good. Heck, when I play Caitlyn with my friends, I just butcher it, because I know I can rely upon them and they have really solid team fighting mechanics. And plus we have voice communication going on, so we can get on the same page really quickly. But I need to diversify my champion pool in ADC. And Caitlyn is just not pulling as much weight in games as I would like, so I'm branching out. But anyway, enough focusing on the addendum to my previous video. Let's talk about Nautilus. Pretty much without question, one of the best supports in the game right now. For like the large majority of picks. Doesn't work well in every composition, but it's hard to go wrong with this as a generic pick for most compositions. He's a very, very solid tank, and pretty much one of the 2 to 3 best tank supports in the entire game right now. Let's explain why Nautilus is one of the best supports in the game right now, and why I pretty much place Nautilus exclusively in support, although I will branch that out too for next season's ranked. Let's talk about Leona briefly. She's always been a good support. She has never not been in meta. She has a defense boost shielding steroid, an AoE that does a nice bit of damage orbiting out from her. She has a targeted melee point blank range CC, that's a stun. She has a line shot gap closer hooking maneuver, and a ultimate that stuns a singular target and has an area of effect damage that can do more damage to people around it. Her passive gives her allies that strike the targets of her abilities more damage, which is pretty much the only advantage she has over Nautilus. Nautilus is otherwise completely identical functionality-wise. He has a hook. His hook doesn't go through minions, but it puts him less out of position. It can also be used to hook to terrain for an escape, but that's also a weakness if you miss and hit a wall. Also, he has a shield. His shield doesn't have timed after a period of time explode in an AoE. His gives his auto attacks an AoE of splash damage on his target. His AoE thing around him is another ability completely that slows and does a little bit more damage than Leona's AoE, and can be used immediately. It isn't on the end of a shield. You can have both up at the same time. Plus, his I hit you and CC you is a root, not a stun, but is practically a stun. And later in the game will last longer, and throughout the game, if you spread it to multiple targets, hit this guy, it applies a lot faster. And the cooldown between uses on the target that you hit, between the time you can hit him and do it again, becomes shorter than the cooldown of Leona's stunning ability. And his ult does the same thing Leona's does with the stun on the intended target, but the stun is easier to hit because it's not a skill shot, it's a point-click ability. Now, it has less AoE, and is a little harder to hit multiple targets with, but you will always have guaranteed CC on your ult, which also does more damage. So let's see. He's functionally very... Oh, wait. And his passive, instead of adding damage to his allies, gives him free AD, which overall doesn't really help much, but it's a nice little tickle thing. The only advantage Leona really has over Nautilus is the boost the damage of the allies and the fact that her ultimate does an AoE around it. That's at least if you fired in the middle of a group, it does more AoE, but it's harder to hit. And Nautilus just over across the board compensates for not giving his allies more damage by doing more damage with pretty much every ability. And also his hook is longer range. So yeah, let's see. He has all of the same functionality as a tank support that has never, ever, ever been not good. Has always been one of the best supports in the entire game. And has several advantages over that support. And has better numbers and capabilities to where he can go in other places that Leona can't go. Seems like a good pick. And also, after the price reduction he got a while back, they're the same price to purchase. I wonder why it took so long for people to notice he was a good support. He's Leona, but easier to play. Leona, however, still sees more play than Nautilus at a competitive level because her skill shot, hook, goes through minions and stuff, and generally, at a competitive level, the ability to add damage to your allies is vastly better than Nautilus is having more damage himself, because that little bit of extra damage in a team fight can sway things considerably. So Leona still sees a lot more play, because Nautilus being easier Leona doesn't matter. They can play. Pro players can play Leona just as well as they can play Nautilus. There's no benefit of being easier. That doesn't come into play. But yeah, Nautilus is easy Leona. If you're not super good at Leona, try Nautilus, and it's pretty much the same thing but easier. Might even make you a better Leona. Also, he can be played in top to reasonable effect against a lot of matchups, because early game Nautilus can outtrade a lot of people, starting with that shield and getting the AoE burst on the E, getting the Q, level 3. It's a little bit less so with the Juggernauts being in top lane, but pre that patch, he could outtrade pretty much everybody, because he could just shield up, burst damage, slow them with the thing, root them in place with the passive, which enables you to get a good couple of whops on them, and when they manage to slip away and they're trying to disengage, you're still reasonably tanky. They may have burst through your shield at best, and then you can still hook them if you want to proceed to kick their asses. And that hook does a reasonable amount of damage, and there's a chance that you'll be able to root them again. So, while he doesn't do a tremendous amount of damage, he does a nice chunk of damage early, and he's freaking hard to get away from. He will just, if you try to get him, he will just get up on your ass, whap you, root you, keep beating on you, and you're trying to get the fuck away, and you're still trying to get away. He hooks you, possibly rooting you again, and just keeps beating on your face with his free bonus AD every level. He's just going to keep hitting you with that anchor, just destroying you. Good trades against anything but the Juggernauts, which I have not played against with Nautilus. Even ranged champions, I've found I could not really do a huge amount against Nautilus unless they were tank shredder champs. Because he could just freaking wade through that shit, hook you in close, and just beat on you. And just destroy your ass. He does have a good, hard time with tank shredders that do % health damage, like all tanks do. And he is a bit item dependent to be tanky. Leona suffers from similar problems. You are somewhat item dependent to be tanky compared to other sports. That's the common weakness of all tank sports. In the jungle, he can also still do reasonably well because of his high damage numbers and his high tankiness. And while Cinderhulk has been nerfed a lot, it's still good on him. So starting with your shield to give you like the damage reduction sustain and the AoE on the basic attacks that the shield gives you. Then you take the E to get the more AoE bursty damage, and taking the hook when you are ready or in a ganking position. He's got so much CC, he can gank really effectively, and guarantee at least a lot of damage without taking a tremendous amount of damage himself. He's very solid as a jungler. So yeah, he's just generally a champion that's a good flex pick to add to your pool. He can be sport. He's an amazing sport. He's a solid top, except maybe against Juggernauts. I haven't tested that out yet. And he's a solid jungler. So if you're looking for a maximum bang for buck, Nautilus is definitely a very stout way to go. And this is the first champion I would say in this series that necessarily isn't a good, not necessarily a good gateway champion, because he's got so much CC and so many things. Unlike Talon and Caitlyn, he doesn't have the benefit of being a not easy champion to play. He doesn't have that, it's not a freebie benefit, because Nautilus is, kind of a freebie. Except if your team doesn't follow up properly. Because if you're a Nautilus support, you're pretty much not bringing any damage to the table of your own. You're just bringing crap tons of CC. You are a team fighting god. If you have a team. You can just destroy. And he plays amazingly well from behind, even if he's not got a super amount of tanky items, as long as your team follows up and capitalizes on your picks. You're like, oh, that target, that position, got him, no, we burned him down, okay, I'm going to do this, okay, keep going. They're all focusing on me for some reason, because they're low elo dumb shits. Just pile on to this priority targets, I will just root everybody. And the peels on this guy are freaking fabulous, because he could just throw, if somebody gets behind him onto the back line, hey, hook, I'm on you, you're away from my ally, you're rooted, I've slowed you with my AoE. The peels are real on this guy. So yeah, if you're not familiar with any of the three positions he goes to, it might be a decent champ to learn that position in. But he's not really a good gateway champion for, learning super solid, like, general mechanics for all tanks, because he's generally easy. He can play from behind, he's got shit tons of C-save, and that's why he can play from behind, and he's relatively easy to play. His only big glaring weakness is he's one of the slower champions in the game as far as base movement speed goes. So yeah, he's really solid, really nice, can go in a lot of places. He's a really safe jungler because he can play from behind and clears safely, and has a shit ton of CC, And even if you don't do well in a jungle, you can still pull your weight in team fights. He's good support for all the previously explained reasons, and he's a solid top laner for his trading ability early in a lot of matchups. So yeah, that's the main reason you should main Nautilus. This is versatility and the sheer shit ton of CC he brings to the table. And he is just a team fighting god. Anyway, it's not as in-depth as my previous videos, or maybe it might be a little bit more in-depth because I gave a breakdown of each position's building order. Generally, for support, you'll want to start shield, and depending on what type of lane you're in, if you're playing with a Draven or a Corki that wants to go aggressive at level 2, then you'd get your hook. You never want to start with your hook because you're not tanky enough at that point to use it. If you use your hook, if you level 1 hook and you hook somebody at level 1, you don't have a shield, you don't have your tanky stats, you're just going to get yourself killed a large majority of the time. Get your hook no earlier than level 2. That way you'll have your shield and then you'll have your hook. You can hook shield or shield hook and then sustain through and tank for the carry. Keeping in mind you're still fragile because you don't have any tanking items at this point. But preferably hook at level 3 if you're not in a hyper aggressive lane, because that way you'll have shield, hook, and the ability to do AoE damage, spike damage, and also briefly slow the target after hook route, so you can keep them there even longer. And then you'll slap your exhaust on there if it's in the correct position scenario, keeping them just locked down for enormous amounts of time. So yeah. Anyway, that's the main reason you want to main Nautilus. Versatility and shit tons of CC. Solid team fighting, because it adds shit tons of CC. Being able to play from behind relatively easily because of those shit tons of CC. You don't want to really pick it in an arrangement where you're ever going up against a tank shredder unless you're super familiar with the champion, or you're very confident in your ADC's ability to pick off that tank shredding champion, because a Vayne will just destroy your ass. And once she gets silver bolts and some attack speed, she'll just destroy you because you rely on large amounts of health. She does percent health damage. She just shreds tanks. It will be really rough against tank shredding champions like Vayne and Corki. So yeah, anyway, this will be Cheese of Ages, signing off.